Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Polytalk EDU. Today, we have a distinct pleasure to have a return guest, um, Professor Tom Patterson from Harvard University. Welcome abroad, Tom.
Wilson, thank you. It's always a delight to be with you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Okay, we have a lot to unpack. I mean, we've been trying to kind of talk about the topic for today's episode for a while, and then the subject matter for today is going to be Donald Trump and the presidential power. So we need to unpack that a little bit, talk about it from a historical perspective, and then how is the Trump presidency it's different in comparison to other presidents. So that is just the main topic, and we're gonna just kind of delve into different things regarding that. So let's just unpack the whole thing and get it started.
Well, if you look at the Constitution, things have not changed over the last 250 years regarding the president. If you look at Article 2, which defines the presidency, that's pretty much the constitutional foundation of the modern presidency. We've had only one amendment to the Constitution that addresses presidential power directly, and that's the amendment that was passed after World War II to limit presidents to 2 terms. So that was actually putting a limit on presidential power. But if you look over the 250 years, we've seen an enormous expansion of presidential power during that period of time. And to some degree, I think a contraction of the power of Congress. So there's been some shifting of power from Capitol Hill, down the hill to the White House. Now the White House is changing, as you know. It's going to have an elegant ballroom, but there's more power centered there than there has been in the past, and less power centered on that beautiful hill on which the Capitol sits.
Okay. All right. So Trump, I'm just gonna jump the gun a little bit and talk about the 22nd Amendment, and then kind of talk about that from that perspective. A lot of times, people are floating the idea of the possibility of Trump being on the ballot in 2028. Steve Bannon talked about it. Different people talked about it. The only way, the conventional way to do that is to repeal the 22nd Amendment. And also, but Steve Bannon was not very unspecific about how to go about it. Is that a real thing we have to be celebrating or worried about? Just kind of talk about that a little bit.
No, I think that's pretty clear. I don't think he could get on the ballot. You may recall there was some attempt to take him off the ballot in 2024 around the Insurrection Act
Sure.
as to whether his actions after the 2020 election met the definition of that act, which was disqualifying for anyone involved in insurrection to hold at any time in the future federal office. And the court said no, that his actions didn't meet the definition in that case. But this is clearly something that the courts can rule on. And the Constitution is so clear that if the Republican Party should choose to nominate Donald Trump, there would be an immediate court challenge. And I think the court would strike him from the ballot, and then Republicans would be back to square one. So I don't think they'd risk doing that. And Trump increasingly has been signaling that he understands that as well. If you listen to what he was saying in January to what he's been saying more recently, I think he's resigned to the fact that he's got about 3 years and 3 months more, and that's it for his presidency.
In many people's minds, I mean, we're talking to different people. Trump is in only his first year as president, but it seems like it's like kind of like dog years. I mean, in many ways, a lot of people think he's been there a lot longer because he's never really kind of gone away when the election was lost in 2020. The question is, I want to ask you, Tom, I'm really interested in knowing the answer for me and my audience. Uh, a lot of times we kind of like to put presidents in kind of the same category. We put maybe like Nixon and Johnson. They have certain attributes similar, FDR and Reagan. Where do we put Donald Trump in terms of like, can we compare him to a previous president or a previous administration, or is he a standalone uh,
I
force?
think he's a standalone president. We've had standalone presidents before. Yeah, I would put Lincoln in that category. during the Civil War, declaring martial law, suspending habeas corpus. That was a very unique presidency at a very unique time. And we've not had a presidency precisely like that before or since. Now, going back to my original point about the Constitution itself having not changed in terms of what it says about executive authority, what's happened over the course of the of history is how presidents think about their office and how others think about the office. That has changed significantly. So, for most of the first 125 years of the presidency was seen as an administrative office. You sit there, you're the chief executive. Your primary job is to make sure that the executive departments carry out the laws enacted by the Congress. That's a limited presidency model. Uh, then you come to the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt, where things dramatically change. You have this huge expansion in the executive branch. You've got that first 100 days where you have dozens of legislative acts get passed by the Congress at Roosevelt's urging, and the federal government changes substantially in terms of its form, the size of the age of the administrative state, and also the role of the presidency, an expectation that a president is going to provide aggressive leadership, not only in the executive realm, but in the legislative realm as well. And that led to the development of a new theory of presidential power. It was called the stewardship theory. Now, interestingly, that name comes from Franklin D. Roosevelt's distant cousin, Theodore Roosevelt. But the way that Theodore Roosevelt saw the presidency and the way that FDR acted on it is the idea that it's not your job simply to carry out the law as written. You got a larger mandate than that. You can do what the law allows you to do and doesn't prohibit you from doing. So kind of now the limits of the presidency are in what the law prohibits as to what the law requires. And that was the presidency that we had for many decades. I would take it all the way through, certainly through the Nixon presidency, that we had this kind of notion, and this allowed for a pretty large role also for the Congress of the United States. For the big things you wanted to do, you kind of looked to Congress. And there, for example, we could point to Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society, the creation of Medicare, Medicaid, federal aid to education in the area of health, welfare. I mean, so much action, but it was the president exerting leadership, but those great programs were coming through the Congress of the United States. So we really had those two branches working in concert. And presidents were varyingly strong or weak, depending on whether they could get Congress to act. And we had some presidents during that period of time that Congress frequently said no, and those are the weaker presidents during that period. But then I think by the end of the 20th century, it was clear that something else was happening with the presidency, that we had developed this enormous administrative state, and that's a constant resource available to the President of the United States. You think, for example, of the executive office of the president. You have the National Security Council. You got the Council of Economic Advisors. You've got the White House Communication and the Press Office and the Office of Management and Budget. And what happened over time is that on the executive side, you had a shifting of kind of the intellectual resources and the power to do a lot of things through regulatory action, as well as through things like executive orders and presidential memoranda, which are things that presidents can do on their own, or executive agreements, which are agreements between the United States and other nations that presidents do on their own and are different from treaties. If a president does a treaty, they've got to go to the Senate and have a two-thirds vote to ratify it. But an
Yeah,
executive
right.
agreement takes effect simply with the signature of the President of the United States. And when presidents discovered they could do that, and the Supreme Court endorsed it in the 1930s, we've had very few treaties, and we've had thousands of executive agreements. So there's a lot that presidents can do on their own, and that led to kind of this theory of the institutional presidency theory, that the the institution of the presidency had so many resources and enough power available to it that presidents increasingly were inclined to go it alone without leaning too much on the Congress of the United States. And one area that we see it in and continue to see it in is the use of military force. Early on, Congress would get involved and there'd be a declaration of war. Well, since World War II, we've not had a direct declaration of war. We've had instances of conflict, military conflict, about 200 times, almost all at the instigation and entirely on the signature by order of the President of the United States. That's kind of the institutional presidency theory. And that carried right up to Biden. That's kind of the way that Biden governed. Now, you still, at times, in that theory or that model, there's times when you need the Congress of the United States, when you want to change the law. And we saw that in the infrastructure bill, for example, that was passed during the first the first year of the Biden administration, or the bill that dealt with clean energy, the climate bill and the like. Now he needed to go to Congress for that, so Congress was still there. Then Donald Trump comes into office, and he acts differently than any of his predecessors. In that sense, he's like Lincoln, but it's different than Lincoln. The circumstances are different. We don't have a civil war. It's not martial law. But what President Trump has done, he's introduced in a record number of executive orders. We've had more than 200 already this year from the pen of Donald Trump. Now, on average, more recent presidents have done 40 a year. So he's five times that, and his year isn't
Course,
over
yeah.
yet, right? So
Yeah.
he's still going. And the other thing about the institutional presidency theory was that you'd push the limits of presidential power, but you wouldn't push them so far that it would bring you into conflict with either Congress or the courts, because that could diminish the presidency, right?
Sure.
But Trump hasn't paid any attention to that. And
Yes.
and so he's taken a lot of actions, and there's been a lot of counteraction in the courts. There are more than 400 lawsuits have been filed, many from state attorney generals against the Trump administration. That's very unusual. What's different is that it's kind of like the institutional presidency theory on steroids, but he's pushing the limits beyond that. And I think what Trump is looking for is that the Supreme Court, at the end of the day, will endorse his idea of a very expanded presidency. Now, the closest thing we have to it, and in some ways, his presidency resembles it, is the unitary executive theory. And what that theory argues is that all executive functions are under the President of the United States, that
Right.
Congress cannot have executive functions. And an example of how Trump has pushed the envelope on that has been we have some federal officials, executive officials, who hold their positions and can be removed only for cause. Now, most of those agencies are regulatory agencies. They were set up in the 1930s. They were set up as commissions with five commissioners, no more than three from one party. And the idea of appointing those commissioners, they served fixed terms. And that idea behind that was to insulate them from immediate partisan pressures. But Trump has fired several of those officials who, under the law, can only be fired for cause. And he argues that basically they're part of the executive branch. And as the President of the United States, I have the authority to fire them. Now, under the law as it exists, he doesn't. But he's hoping that the Supreme Court will change that particular precedent and allow the president to do the firings of those for cause, which would increase the power of the presidency, obviously, over those
Sure.
particular agencies. But interestingly enough, he's also intruded on areas that belong to the Congress of the United States. So um, Congress has the power to spend, to appropriate
Sure.
funds. And up until this point, the idea has been when Congress appropriates money for a program, the president, faithfully executing the law, spends that money on those programs. Well, Trump has withheld more than 400 billion in congressional appropriations since the start of the year. Basically, he's decided that he can decide which programs will be funded and which ones will not. Up until this point, that's been Congress's authority. The tariffs are another example. If you look at the Constitution, Congress has the power of taxation and the power to levy tariffs. There's nothing in the in Article 2, which defines presidential power, that gives the president even an inkling of power over tariffs. Now, Congress can hand over some of its power to the president in a particular area,
Sure.
but it has not done so in the area of tariffs. So, what's unusual about this and different from the unitary executive theory is Trump's usurpation of, of legislative power, powers that belong to the Congress of the United States. Now, those cases are going to go to the Supreme Court. I think we're going to get different rulings. I think we're going to get split rulings from the Supreme Court on these different questions. I think for sure the Supreme Court's going to strike down these four-clause appointments, with one exception. I think they're going to protect the independence of the governors of the Federal Reserve Board. They serve for fixed year terms. That's a 14-year term. That's designed to insulate them from politics. And I think the court understands that central banks play a different role in today's world than they did 50 or 60 years ago. And it's important to insulate central banks from immediate political pressures. But other than that, I think they're going to give President Trump and also future presidents then, because this will become precedent, broad authority over the executive branch, control of nearly every executive function. I don't think, however, that the Supreme Court is going to allow the President of the United States to take powers away from the Congress of the United States that Congress has not delegated to the President. And we recently had the oral hearing in the Supreme Court on the tariffs case. And it's pretty clear that even the Republican appointees on that court, which have been pretty friendly to the Trump administration so far, were pretty skeptical of the president's power to declare tariffs on virtually every country in the world and do it arbitrarily. So I think we're going to get mixed outcomes, but I think at the end of the day, we're going to end up with a new model of the presidency. It's going to be the unitary executive theory, where pretty much the president controls everything within the executive branch. Now, interestingly, that may take us back to an earlier time, to the time before we had a civil service. And we had a patronage system where you had to be close to the president to get a job in the administration. So I think we're going to see increasingly partisan executive branches, and driven by the President of the United States. I think that's going to be the model going forward. But the Congress will still retain its core powers going forward.
Okay. Now, just to kind
Sorry
of
about such a
ask.
lengthy answer.
Oh, no, no,
But
that's perfect. It's
yeah.
perfect. Yeah. Just kind of talk about a little bit about you mentioned something about weak presidents as opposed to strong presidents, and also the fact that Trump is going to be after Trump leaves office, he's going to do like a whole like a paradigm shift in the power of the
Yeah,
presidents
yeah.
coming forward. Now the distinction between when you say something like a weak president as opposed to a strong president, is it a combination between like a sheer personality and also when the president walk into the office, if they have a united government as opposed to divided government, and if they also the Supreme Court is in line with them, and they won convincingly, they won like the popular vote, they won the electoral college. When they walk in, do they have a more kind of a more legs to stand on in terms of being more powerful than someone who is not having these things kind of lined up? What's your think
Oh,
about
I
it?
think absolutely. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., the historian, who was also an advisor to President Kennedy, said the arithmetic is decisive. And what he was
Mm,
talking about would, if you're the president and your party also controls the House and the Senate and has very comfortable majorities in the House and the Senate, you're going to be able to do a lot. On the other hand, if you come into the Oval Office and the Congress is controlled by the other party, that's going to pretty much limit what you can do with the legislative option. In those instances, then you're inclined toward the executive option, what you can do with executive orders, presidential memoranda, national security memos, and the like, executive agreements. those presidencies, interestingly, often tend to be kind of stronger in the foreign policy area because they can do more on their own without Congress in the area of foreign policy than they can in the domestic space. So it does make a difference, kind of what the landscape is like, how sizable your victory was, because if you have a sizable victory, that usually means your party also did very well in the congressional election. So almost always in that case, you have what we call unified government, where the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives are all controlled by the same party. That's the time when you really get robust governing of the classical form. When we have divided government, and since the 1970s, we've had divided government about half the time. Then it's much harder for presidents to get done what they'd like to do. You could look, for example, at the Obama administration, and if you, in the first 2 years, he had a Democratic Congress and pretty sizable majorities in both the Senate and the House. He was able to get the Affordable Care Act, which was the biggest piece of domestic legislation since the 1960s through the Congress. Then in the 2010 midterms, it's a red wave. The Republicans really do well. They don't quite take the Senate, but they cut the margin down significantly. They have a pretty sizable margin in the House of Representatives, and his legislative agenda basically comes to a stop. And
Right,
what does he do? He
right.
starts resorting to executive orders,
Right.
DACA, uh,
Yes.
deferred action for children who came here.
Children came here. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
that was an executive order. That was not a legislative act. So,
absolutely, absolutely.
so
Yeah.
presidents are going to respond. What I'm saying, I think, Mosen, is that presidents are going to respond to the hand that they're dealt, to use the words of President Clinton. If they're lucky enough to have a Congress that has a large majority of their party, they have the possibility of a very strong presidency.
Right.
If they don't, they're going to ordinarily be weaker than that.
Sure.
Yeah,
And sometimes also, I mean, from a historical perspective, you really have to be careful what you wish for. You might get it, and when you get it, you may not like it.
yeah,
For instance, like a lot of times when you're operating under the impression, not the impression, under the rule of the law, that actually you have a divided government and things don't go your way, you can always say, you know what, these guys on the other side of the Capitol Hill, they're not cooperating, whatever the case might be. But when you
yeah.
have a united government and things are not still not going your way, and it's not gonna make as a compelling of an argument to communicate your message with the public. If I'm not mistaken, I think President Carter, for the better part of his administration, he had a united government, and he had a very bad relationship with Congress. And then, I mean, when you have members of your own party, kind of like not rooting for you, or they're not really kind of, in your side, it makes you, by definition, a weak president, even if you have the like a huge personality. It just does not. And the leading question to this one is like the fact, how can Trump be looking at this like we have a government shutdown. It just reopened yesterday. We have a united government, and then also in the past 2 3 weeks, the Democrats did very well in the election, in Virginia, in New Jersey, also Mamdani in New York. How is that gonna be setting the stage up for the 2026 midterm elections in terms of like maybe the propensity of losing more seats, or what's your thought on that?
No, that's a really interesting question. And, the Democrats both won and lost the shutdown, right?
Sure.
So if you look at the polls, they won. They more voters blamed the shutdown on the Republicans than on the Democrats. At the same time, Democrats did not get their primary demand, which is to restore the funding for the subsidies that make health insurance affordable to people of somewhat above the poverty line. All of those kind of add-on funds that you would get to hold those premiums down. Now, some of those have really mushroomed, have expanded enormously. Now, interestingly, that's a policy loss. It's probably a political win because one of the things the shutdown did was it made pretty clear to most Americans who's withholding the funding on on health insurance.
Sure.
It's the Republicans, right? And we're talking about millions of people who are not going to be able to afford their health insurance in the coming year. Some of them have chronic conditions
Sure.
and very high bills, and even if your insurance costs less than your medical bills might be, if you can't afford the upfront cost of the insurance, you're not going to be able to buy it.
Sure.
Now, all of those voters, to me, are at risk to the Republicans. And what's interesting is the Republicans have, over the last 30 years, have made real inroads with lower income Americans. Those are the Americans we're talking about who are eligible for the funding that goes with the Affordable Care Act and making the insurance within reach. So in many ways, it's Republican voters as much as it is Democratic voters who are going to be harmed by that particular inaction, policy inaction. So I think it's a political win for the Democrats. I think it's going to carry into the 2026 election. That's why we may even see a December surprise. I don't think it'll happen, but we might. Republicans are going to have about a month to kind of think about the political costs of the increased premiums for health insurance. And they're going to be reading the polls, and they're going to see that it's hurting them. Then the Senate is going to get on the floor of the Senate a vote on extending that assistance to those individuals. Do Republicans blink at that point and say, uh, we we can't stand the loss, the political loss, even though we don't like the policy implications? They'd like to cut back significantly on the Affordable Care Act. So I think there may even be positive action in this space before the midterms, simply because this is such a politically costly issue for the Republicans at this point, and they've got to do something proactively, or it's going to haunt them all the way through until the next election.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Now we talked about how Trump is different from his predecessors, right? I mean, in the previous presidents and everything else. One thing I've kind of been paying attention to with the first administration of Trump and then the second one now, um, is his cabinet. Okay. A lot of times when you have a president who is kind of unconventional, like it reminds me back when George Bush, W. Bush, he took over, this whole thing about Florida, and then, the final decision was being
Yeah.
made in the Supreme Court. But a lot of people thought he did not have the experience that other people had, compared even to George H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
But he surrounded himself with very conventional, capable cabinets, whether you agree with them or not, but they're policy wonks, right? There's a lot of policy wonks in that
Or
administration.
deeply experienced like James
Yes,
Baker.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really cannot say the same about the pick for Donald Trump in the both administrations. I mean, his cabinet, some of them they fit that mold, but some
Mhm.
of them they're kind of unconventional
Mhm.
in terms of like their background. And what's your thought on that, on Trump's picks and his cabinets?
Well, the first term is somewhat different from the second term.
Yes,
That one was mixed.
right, it
So
was.
you had this mix of some cabinet secretaries had the look of previous cabinet secretaries,
Sure.
and then some just looked kind of like, where did this come from? One being your former governor there, who
Yes.
was placed in charge of the Department of Energy, and when he was running for the presidency,
Rick
said he
Perry,
wanted
right?
to
Yes.
abolish the Department of
Absolutely,
Energy.
absolutely. Rick
So
Perry,
the
yes, yeah.
idea that you'd put someone in charge of a department who preferred that it not exist, that's an unconventional
That
choice,
was that
right?
was very
And
interesting, yes.
putting a lobbyist, a business lobbyist, in charge of labor and a few things like that. I mean, these were very unusual appointments, right?
Yeah, it
But
really was.
But that almost looks like a traditional cabinet compared to the cabinet that he assembled this time. And I think, Trump, whatever one thinks about Trump, and however, whatever side one is on Trump, he's pretty astute about certain kinds of things and kind of lining up things in a way so that what he wants to get done can get done. And he had a lot more resistance in that first term than he expected. Now, some of it came from those cabinet secretaries, particularly in the Department of Defense, with Milley and the like, really pushing back pretty hard on some of the things that he wanted to do. And it was also the case that in the Congress, Mitch McConnell, particularly in the Senate, would deep six what he thought were the bad ideas. So it wasn't that he came out against them. It's just that they never got out of committee. So they never came up for a vote. So, but of course, Trump understood that. He knew that. He was very resentful, both of those cabinet members and those in Congress that he thought were undermining his agenda. Uh, and he saw that also with his personal staff. Some of his early appointments for chief of staff, for example, he thought basically they worked behind his back and against him. So by the end of his first term, he was starting to appoint people to positions that really were loyal to Trump, more so than had the kind of experience and background that would qualify them for the position that they were appointed to. And I think that's pretty much the yardstick he used in appointing the current cabinet. So number one, loyalty to the presidency. Number two, maybe some level of expertise, but probably not very much in the policy area that the cabinet deals with. And but that also increases what we talked about early. If you share this idea of the unitary executive, everything emanates from the president. All the authority is in the president of the United States, not in the branch. And it's the directives of the president that govern, right? So that in some ways, cabinet secretaries then are agents, direct agents of presidential directives and orders. In times past, cabinet secretaries have been seen to be partly that, but also partly independent stewards of the agency they headed. But that doesn't seem to be the model that Trump is pursuing. Now, my guess is even if the unitary executive theory, by order of the Supreme Court, by the rulings that it delivers, some will come this year. If that de facto becomes the theory of the presidency, I don't think that future presidents will necessarily follow Donald Trump's appointment process in terms of how they think about who should be um, the cabinet secretaries. I think Trump was so determined to change the flavor and texture direction of the federal bureaucracy that he thought he absolutely needed a loyalist in every one of those positions, and that his test for qualifications was, are you doing what I want you to do or not?
Okay. Interesting. Now, Tom, I'm sure we touched base on this in the previous, podcast we've had. But I was kind of circle back to a couple of things in here. Which party you think, in your opinion, is more united in terms of like right now it looks like the Democratic Party, it's like they're going really far left, and then the Republicans going far right. I mean, right now they have the polarization within the two respective
Yeah,
parties,
yeah.
but within the parties themselves, it seems like the kind of like a huge shift within the party itself. Which of the two you think is more uniform and more united? And then what is the ramification of that unity is going to look like
Yeah.
in the upcoming years?
Well, I think at the moment, probably the Republican Party, but I would make a distinction, I think, between these two parties. So they're both factional parties in the sense that
Sure.
they're not fully united. What's different about the two is the much larger faction, actually, in the Democratic Party is the more moderate faction, the moderate liberals as opposed to the left side liberals. So Now, often with the media in either party, the extremes sometimes get more attention. AOC, Bernie Sanders get a lot of attention from the national media, and they're on the left wing, obviously, of the Democratic Party. But they're actually pretty small in number compared to the moderates. And that's true in the Congress, for example. And it's also true if you look at the polls as to kind of, for example, in presidential preference ratings for looking ahead to 2028, we can't seem to ever quit running for the presidency or asking people who they'd like to be the next president. But in the latest poll of Democrats, AOC gets 3%. And
Well,
but if you're talking about what the pundits are saying, what the media are saying about possibilities in 2028, she's getting a lot more than 3% of the coverage. So I think that you may have a perception that the Democratic Party is more left than it actually is, but it's the dominant faction, clearly, by far, is the moderate faction. Now you look at the Republican side, and that's the opposite, where the moderate faction is actually the much smaller piece of that party. Uh, the dominant faction is the mega section of the party, and that's the more extreme faction of the party. They wag they wag the tail, and on the Democratic side, I think nobody wags the tail. uh, in that sense, they're not quite as united, but they're the body of the dog, and the real on the left is the tail. But the Republican Party is kind of the reverse of that. So, and I do think when the stronger faction is on the wing as opposed to in the center, you're gonna have more unity in a sense because that forces the moderates in the party actually to go toward the extreme if they want to get anything right. And there's not really much opportunity for them to work with the other party to get things done, right? And that's actually what's happened to our Congress. The middle has been hollowed out of the Congress, and mostly on the Republican side. So if you go back 50 years, the real power in Congress was the moderates of both parties. But now we don't have a nucleus of moderates in both parties that have the ability to drive what their caucus does. So the moderate Republicans really don't have much say in terms of what the caucus is going to do. And when that's the case, then you face deadlock because you got Democrats who might work with Republicans, don't have enough Republicans to work with. And then on the other side, you got a lot of Republicans that aren't interested in working with the Democrats. So that's the recipe for deadlock. And particularly when the numbers, like in the House of Representatives, are as close as they are. You know, and in some ways, it limits President Trump as well. He's got such a narrow margin in the House that any kind of legislative effort that might split even 10% of Republicans off from that caucus dooms that effort to failure because the Democrats will oppose it almost to the person.
sure.
So he doesn't have much in the way of a legislative option. And it kind of goes to your point about when you come into the Oval Office, what else comes with you, right?
Right,
And
right,
you're going to
right.
be strong or weak in various areas, depending on kind of what Congress looks like and what your options are otherwise, what kind of support you have in the public sphere. And, Trump's strength has always been he's got this real loyal band of followers in the public and I think a question for the Republican Party, since he won't be able to run again in 2028, is there any leader that can pick up that mantle? Or is that part of the party so dependent on Trump's persona that when he steps off the main stage, that it will not have the punch it has when he's on the
Yeah,
stage?
sure. I think one thing interesting in the past few weeks, he was asked about who's going to be kind of be the de facto leader of the Republican Party after he leaves in 2028, after he kind of the idea is settled that he's not going to
Yeah.
be the president. And then he did not really fully endorse the JD Vance. And then he kind of one time he jokingly he said Rubio and Vance. It was like, which is kind of really kind of interesting, is putting them in a position to kind of compete for, I don't know, for his approval or for the like I don't know what he was going for. I've never seen that
Yeah,
happen at that level where you have like two members of the cabinet kind of like in a way like either one of these guys will do great. It's like okay, I mean that's not a I don't know. It really felt weird. Usually presidents are either stingy in endorsing their vice president, as what
yeah,
Eisenhower was reluctant, with
yeah,
Nixon,
yeah,
or you cannot just do not. It's you're above that. So Trump seems like he was not above that.
yeah.
So that's that. But is there any precedent to that? Has anybody any previous um, administration kind of did that? Or I think that's a uniquely Trump, to me, in my opinion. I think.
Well, you open up a good question that I haven't really thought about too much, but you're quite right about some presidents being pretty stingy in terms of thinking about their vice president. I mean, we have a more recent example than Eisenhower and Nixon. We've got Obama,
Sure.
and we come to the 2016 election, and
Absolutely.
who does he back? Not as vice president, not Joe Biden. He backs
Exactly.
Hillary Clinton,
Right.
and so that's always a relationship to watch and see how it evolves over the course of the 4 years. And of course, the Trump's first term, by the end of his term, the he had alienated his vice president, and his vice president was alienated in turn from the president. So that's never a given. Here's my sense of this, Moses, and I may be totally wrong about this. I don't think Trump, uh, as a personality, is going to easily give up center stage. That's why I think he was talking about, can we figure out how to do this third term business? I think he would have loved a third term, would still like a third term. I think he's come to realize that that can't happen. But I think in the back of his mind, I think he still thinks he can call the shots. Now, exactly what that arrangement would be, uh, who would be sitting in the Oval Office and have the formal authority, but would have I don't know if it'd be a red phone like the one that used to exist between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And if it rang, it was we got a nuclear weapon problem that we've got to deal with. So
Right.
that was the hotline. So I suspect there'll be a hotline if Republicans
Sure.
win the presidency in 2028. I think there'll be a hotline from Mar-a-Lago to to the Oval Office and certain sounds of displeasure if
Sure.
what he wants doesn't happen. So it may be that Trump would prefer someone who is willing to listen and listen hard
Sure.
and listen well. Uh,
Yeah.
in the end of the day, that's who we might see as the Trump endorsed nominee in
Okay.
2028.
So you think unofficially it could be like a scenario, kind of like what happened with Putin and
Yeah,
Medvedev, like kind of
yeah,
like they're
yeah,
just
yeah,
shifting in
yeah,
terms of,
yeah.
wow, okay,
I mean, no,
and
it won't be quite the same as that because,
yes, it would not be an official
because
capacity. Yeah.
in part because Putin, when the one time he did surrender the presidency, even before he came back, he did hold the post of prime minister.
Right.
So he was still in the government in that sense, and
Sure.
but it was clear in for that period of time in Russia that the president was not governing Russia; it was the prime minister who was
Right.
governing Russia.
Right.
But I do think in whatever the American version of that is, might be in the back of Trump's mind is what he'd most
Absolutely.
like to see happen after
Absolutely.
2028. Right.
Yeah. And a lot of times when whoever is going to pick up the mantle after, an end of a second term, obviously the president cannot run again. In the people's minds, a lot of people think like a lot of vice presidents become presidents, but actually there's only twice, Martin Van Buren and then George H.W. Bush, that became president right after serving as a VP. We've had other,
Except through death. Right.
except for the, yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, they,
Right.
they can like Biden became, but he did
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Which is so a
And
lot of
Nixon with the delay. Right.
with a delay. I'm,
Yeah.
I'm talking
Right.
about like
Right.
right
No,
after.
I
I'm
know.
talking about
Yeah. You're
yeah.
right. You're
I
right.
think I think that in my opinion, I think my memory serves me, who took over like immediately, and then they were vice president and became president right after,
Yeah.
is just twice.
Yeah.
But in our minds, we feel like okay, every vice president has like like kind of an indoor and inside track to the Oval Office, and it doesn't really usually happen that way. kind of, so it's kind of an interesting thing who's going to be picking up the mantle in terms of the endorsement. And JD Vance in his mind and then in the psyche of the people,
Yeah.
the people think he is
There are more if we go back to the very early part of the Republic, where you get John Adams succeeding and so on. So,
right,
but the so that line of succession was more clear through the first six presidencies or so, for 6 or 7.
right, right,
Uh,
right.
but in terms of when it got opened up,
Would have got opened up,
in
yeah,
the
yeah,
1830s, when basically the presidency got opened up to some form of popular voting, it's been very hard for vice presidents to succeed to the presidency.
exactly, yeah. And now what I meant that clarification is I meant when it opened up because
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
very early era of the Republic, whoever was that, like John Adams and everybody else
yeah,
was like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
it's like a
right,
de
right,
facto
yeah,
thing that you
yeah,
go into it.
yeah.
But it's really interesting. Now, from a constituency standpoint, like Trump has his supporters, and then in terms of the American people, is there anybody who is in office now, maybe JD Vance or somebody else, that probably is has the more capability, like more connection with the people, that he's going to uphold what Trump is trying to continue after he leaves office? Like which of
Well, I would put probably at this moment, and it could change. You never quite know the dynamics of these presidential primaries. Occasionally you do get a Jimmy Carter or someone comes out of the woodwork. Barack Obama, in some ways, came out of the woodwork in 2008. He
Sure.
had only served 2 years in the Senate of the United States. So surprises do happen, and but I think J.D. Vance would be probably the one that I would put in that category of force to pick at this point. I think Vance is ambitious, and I think Vance has figured out exactly kind of where Trump sits relative to MAGA. And Vance has moved into all of those positions. They've become his positions. So I think he can talk the positions that appeal to Trump's followers. Whether he has the persona to pull that off, that's a different question. Right. And I don't think we've seen enough of Vance yet to know whether that's the case. But in terms of just positioning, I think he's done that pretty well, pretty adroitly, and without making it too obvious and without making his ambitions uh, kind of overly apparent, even though he's hugely ambitious. You think about the governor of Florida, and you know, to some degree, he was the victim of his ambitions, right? He was too ambitious, right? And we have one of those politicians here, I think, in Massachusetts at the moment. Congressman Seth Moulton is taking on Senator Markey in the Democratic primary. You know, Seth has been a good House member, but he had only been in the House a couple of terms, and he tried to overthrow Nancy Pelosi, and uh, and now he's trying to throw a seated senator. I think his ambitions exceed his grasp, and we'll see whether that's true of J.D. Vance as well.
Okay. So JD Vance, and we always do kind of like prediction game. Is there any apparent leader, or an emerging leader from the Democratic side? People are saying maybe Kamala Harris is going to do it again, maybe the governor of California. Is there anybody who is things going to be lined up for them to kind of put themselves in a position to run in 2028 and capture, the votes?
Yeah. Well, as I said, we don't seem to ever stop the presidential election cycle. So the pollsters have been asking Democrats who they'd like to see as the Democratic nominee, and nobody polls above 20%. I think Newsom has the highest percentage at the moment, but you also get a response to who's in the news, and he's been very much in the news over the last 2, 3, 4 months. So some of that simply top of mind response. I think I think there's maybe a surprise on the Democratic side. The they made one of the things that's interesting about out parties is when you're in the wilderness and you're kind of feeling the heat of the wilderness. you tend to be a little more pragmatic about picking who you're going to have as your nominee. You tend to be a little bit less ideological, and you tend to think more about who can win, who's going to be the winner in this. We got to get it back.
Sure.
We got to stop being out of power. It's too painful to be out of power. Then you start thinking more pragmatically, and whether they'll be candidates or not, I think it's an open question. But let's say that Cooper wins in North Carolina in that governor's race. He'd be a very strong, I think, contender for the presidential nomination if he should decide to run. The governor of Kentucky, a Democrat who wins in a red state, that's a very unusual candidate.
Sure.
There's a lot of talk. A lot of people would have preferred Whitmer to Harris when Biden decided to step down. Of course, they didn't have that chance. Whether she's resurrectable at this point, she's kind of disappeared from the scene. So
Sure.
I don't know what her chances are at the moment. But I think it's going to be. I think the Democrats are going to be pretty darn hard-headed about this. And if they think someone like Gavin Newsom can only be guaranteed to win the blue states, I'm not so sure that that's going to carry. I think there's going to be some real rational voting. We don't always see it in
Yeah.
primaries, but once in a while we do, where people will
Yeah.
actually think about not only who do I like best, but of those I like, which
Who
one's
has the
going to win?
chance?
Who
Who has
can
the
win?
chance to win?
Who can win?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think if you're winning in your own states, like blue states, red states, I mean that's expected.
yeah,
But you really have to have a massive appeal to the people actually
yeah,
who do not adhere
yeah,
to any specific party, which is a lot of people. Actually they do
yeah.
not. But if you break it down, but in terms of where they live, it makes a big difference. Where do they live? Are they living in swing states and the turnout? And it's a lot of kind of interesting components
Yeah, and the
that
thing that I
kind
look
of
at
goes into it.
and I look more in the polls. They don't always ask it in these early polls, but I look more at the unfavorability rating than the favorability rating. That
Okay,
if a candidate has high favorability, but also has high unfavorability, then you're going to be campaigning uphill with that candidate to
sure,
try to
absolutely.
change people's minds.
Yeah, you're
Right.
coming in with
So,
a big baggage. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely,
right, right.
absolutely,
So,
absolutely. Okay,
so in that same poll, Newsom also has the highest unfavorable rating.
that is
So,
true. That is true.
and
It's like both sides.
AOC also has high unfavorable. So,
Absolutely,
right, yeah.
absolutely. Okay, I know we're respectful of time, and we are just coming to approaching the end. Tom, just kind of like just a concluding thought. I mean, again, the topic was Donald Trump and the presidential power. Just kind of land it. I mean, for us. I mean, what is there anything you want to just conclude this podcast with? The Trump presidency and the presidential power in terms of the takeaway point for this.
I think we are seeing the redefining of what the presidency is about, and I think it's going to be very clear, very close to the unitary executive theory, where presidents pretty much have control of everything within the executive branch, including virtual ability to fire at will anyone who holds an executive position, except at certain levels of the civil service. So um, that will be a different presidency than we've seen in the past, one where there's less sharing of power with the Congress of the United States. And that will be the presidency inherited by the next president, whether a Democrat or a Republican. And once you hold the presidency, we've not had very many presidents who've decided, well, I'm going to give back power. Right. That's not the dynamic. You get into that office and you think, now I want to govern. Now I want to create my historical legacy. I want to be thought about after I leave this office. And that requires action. And if I can get a lot of things done simply through unilateral executive action, I'm going to use the tools that the Constitution, precedent, and the Supreme Court have handed to me.
Okay. Now, just one last thing. I'm not just approaching, you're running out of time. Just one last thing. The Mamdani, election in New York. You think at some point people are going to have to face the music? I mean, he already won. He's going to be sworn in January 1st. You think overall that Trump will actually just try to work with him, or they will do everything they can to stampede or to actually to stop to screeching halt his like agenda? Just very
Oh,
quickly.
I don't think they care much about his agenda. I think that he's the perfect foil
Okay.
for Republicans in the same way that Democrats handed Republicans the perfect foil around Black Lives Matter when they started to talk about defund the police. So, the mayor, the soon-to-be mayor of New York, will soon become the poster child of what Democrats are all about in Republican rhetoric. So, I think that's more of the way they're going to be thinking about him than I don't think that whether there's more housing in New York or this or that in New York, I don't think that's too much on Republicans' minds. I think what advantage can they get from his election? And
Okay.
Democrats do the same thing when they have the
Absolutely.
opportunity.
Absolutely. Both are
Absolutely.
guilty of the same thing. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
All right, Tom, as
Well, it's a
always,
continuing conversation, so this won't be
it's a
our
con
last one.
we always set things up for the next one, and
Right.
I really had a great time, and then hopefully the audience will enjoy it as well. And then we'll be in touch, and I will send you the recording of it once it gets published, which will be later on today.
Okay.
Tom, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you,
so
Mohsen.
gracious with your
Pleasure as
time, and
always.
thank
Take
you so
care.
much. Take
Have a
care.
good
Bye bye.
holiday season. Okay.
Thank you. You too. Bye bye.
Okay. Yeah. Bye.